who is now the professor and chair of surgery at the Department of Surgery, Stanford University in Palo Alto. And Dr. Hawn is currently the Stanford Medicine Chair of Surgery, which will likely be renamed when a sitting chair steps down in the near future. So to have a faculty member return as the chair is a great accolade for any institution in the United States, and especially a prestigious institution like Stanford. We're extremely proud of you, Mary. I want you to know that. You've got huge friends. You're always welcome back here. And if you don't like it in Palo Alto because of the cost of all, you'll always have a job back here. You know that. Well, let me just give you a brief, snapshot view of Dr. Hawn. I certainly can't do this in 2 or 3 minutes, but for the students in the room, Dr. Hawn is a native of Michigan, one of 6 siblings.
7, yes, yeah,
7. 7, sorry. Mary was the 7th. She's a graduate of the University of Michigan, and her blood runs true blue and gold, I can tell you that. Even despite being in a state of pretty elegant football, didn't matter. She was a go blue, always a great fan, and still is. And I'm sure that'll happen when the Michigan the team shows up at Stanford, right, Mary?
That's right.
She's an undergraduate of the University of Michigan. She received her medical training at the University of Michigan. And during the course of her general surgery residency, she got a master's of public health. So she's MD, PhD. And she actually finished her general surgery residency with laser greed field at the University of Michigan. She decided she wanted to do minimally invasive surgery like a number of her residents who have worked under her. She did a laparoscopic fellowship at Oregon Health Sciences Center in Portland. And she and Eben at the same time, simultaneously, her husband, if you're not aware of the students, was the chief of otolaryngology here. He is now the medical director of the Stanford Institute the Cancer Institute at Stanford. And he's coming back to Birmingham today. Is that right, Mary?
Tomorrow morning,
excuse me. And anyway, Eben was in the middle of a fellowship. Mary finished her fellowship in MIS at Oregon. And fortunately, very fortunately, Glenn Peters came to me one day and said he wanted to think about recruiting this young faculty member who he thinks has got a great future. He's interested in microvascular anastomosis and flap transfers, and he's fully trained in oncologic ENT, someone he truly needs. Evan developed a serious practice here, ultimately aspired and became the chief of the division of otolaryngology. And Mary was appointed by me as the first woman chief of a division or section in the department. I'm glad to tell you that. When Selwyn Vickers left in '06 to go to Minnesota. And so Mary, as the first division director and as a female, is more than saying a lot, because look what she has done subsequently. She has been the ultimate mentor. You heard last night from Laura and who was the other one, Laura? Brittany, of course. Where's Brittany? There she is. Brittany, who had them present the mentorship that she had provided, and she has just been a superb mentor throughout. This comes from her own background at the University of Michigan, where she won multiple awards. I'll start with the American Gastrointestinal Association Student Research Prize of the University of Michigan, the Phi Chi Freshman Anatomy Award, the Albert Firstrig Otolaryngology Student of the Year. Now, Mary, would they try to recruit you in ENT at Michigan too?
for a little bit.
Laser saw the light. She also won the C. Gardner-Child Award for Excellence in General Surgery. Dr. Child is a staple name in surgery, and she was the administrative chief at the University of Michigan. She won the Kohler Society Traveling Award, Surgical Society, which she was chief resident. Now, here, while at UAB, she has been won the AOA Faculty Honor Society Award when she was inducted, and in '08 won the Argus Award from the students, again depicting her mentorship. She's been very successful in the VA hospital while here. Mary, you going to have a VA appointment there too?
I will.
You will? Because she has been a mentor for many on grants through the VA. She had a major grant from the VA on enhancing surgical quality and cardiac risk, stenting, not to mention the general aspects of patient care and mentoring on predicting surgical outcomes. Enormously successful. She is on 4 journals presently. She's a very busy person, and of this month, she will become a member of, a director of the American Board of Surgery. So it gives me enormous pleasure to introduce a friend, your colleague, mentor of many in this room, Dr. Mary Hawn, who will present the art of success. She's how do you learn from your failures. Dr. Hawn, please welcome her.
Thank you, Dr. Bland. All right, well, thank you very much, Dr. Bland, and it is really a pleasure to be up here and to give this talk. It's kind of a fun talk, so hopefully I'll keep you entertained. And it really came, Brittany and a couple of the other residents said, you know, we'd like you to give a grand rounds before you leave. And we couldn't work it out, but we worked it out when I came back for a resident graduation. So, so this is really a talk that's not based on data. So, and I have a couple of disclosures. So I like dogs, and I've never been to a NASCAR event, despite living close to Talladega. And I've only lived in Silicon Valley for 2 weeks, but I'm happy to talk about failure and failing fast and why it's the key to success. So I'll take a lot of liberties there. And then my perspective, so this is really an opinion talk. It's not data. You're not going to see any slides on data. But in my opinion, it's informed by being a surgeon and a division director and being the wife of a surgeon and the wife of a division director and the mom of hopefully 2 aspiring surgeons. So here's Sarah and Walker at younger years in the skills lab. So, and the purpose of this talk really for me is to share my experiences and thoughts on my career path with you, some of the successes and failures that I've had, and the conceptual framework that I'm going to use. So a lot of people like to talk about surgery being like flying an airplane, right? You need checklists and safety culture, but I'm going to say that surgery is more like race car driving. And because I think that surgery is exhilarating, and it can really seem monotonous. You can be driving, you know, watching those cars go around and around and around on a track, and nothing's really changing until it does. And when the circumstances change, you need to be able to respond. So, and really what I wanted to do was to make a talk based on this book, which is why we adopted the conceptual framework of race car driving. So this is a book called The Art of Racing in the Rain. Has anybody read it? No, a couple people have, right? So it's a novel. It's not a nonfiction leadership book, and it's written from the perspective of a dog named Enzo. And he's writing the story about his owner's life, Denny, who's a race car driver. And so the corollaries that I have drawn with surgery and life and leadership are my own, kind of based on some of the lessons from this book. So, and I think I was drawn to this book because this is my first dog, Romeo, and he kind of looks a little bit like the dog on the cover. So what are the lessons that I'm going to talk about from The Art of Racing in the Rain? And so it's really important, I think, you know, for our chiefs as they're going out, our interns who are beginning their careers, is that really that no race is won in the first turn, okay? The car goes where the eye goes, and true champions excel in the rain. So when we think about success, this is what we think it looks like, right? We think it looks like a straight line. You know, you start here and you keep having more and more success and climbing the ladder, so to speak. And we all know people who have success like that, and they usually will step over everybody to get there. But I think what it really looks like for most of us is a squiggly line. So you have some successes, you have some setbacks, you have some failures, you don't know which way you're going, your car may be spinning out of control, and you really have to get out of those loops to continue to march along that path of success. So I think that's how it really looks like for most of us. So, so I'm going to tell a little bit of the story behind the story that Dr. Bland told, and I guess this doesn't have a pointer. So I am the 6th of 7 children, and I like showing this picture here because the first 6 of us were very, very close together. And this is me right here. So when I was born, she was in 1st grade kindergarten, and these 3 were at home when I was born. So that's an enormous amount of work. And then 6 or 7 years, a long hiatus between me and my baby brother. And there are a lot of reasons why that might have happened, and you know, they're not here to tell their versions. I'm going to say they thought they'd stop when they got it right, and then the accident came along. They might tell you something different. So, but I alluded this to a little bit from a birth order last night, but when this is your birth order, you learn a lot of different strategies of how to get along in life. And so you learn how to manage up. You learn how to create strategic alliances because it's easy to get outnumbered, so you have to have some allies who have more power. So it was a good life lesson. And then I just can't resist this picture of the 70s. And my brother, I think, still wants those pants. So Dr. Bland alluded a little bit. So when I graduated from high school, I was accepted to University of Michigan's Interflex program, which is an undergrad program where you get automatic admittance to medical school as long as you maintain a 2.0. And you don't have to take the MCATs. So I've never taken the MCATs, and I maintained a 2.0, so I got to go to medical school at the University of Michigan. So it was a pretty good deal. And then when I went to college, I worked in Tachi Yamada's lab. So most of you probably don't know Tachi, but he was a rising star as a gastroenterologist. And I started out doing basic science research, and that's where I really started doing basic science research. And won the AGA Student Research Prize and presented at the plenary session at DDW. My first major scientific presentation was in front of about 3,000 people at the Digestive Disease Week in San Francisco. And then other successes, one that I'm really proud of is being the outstanding medical student going into surgery in my medical school class. And so I had a lot of early successes. And I think the important things to know is that, no race is won in the first term, right? So you can have some really good early successes, get admitted to a really competitive program, and have some really good successes and awards, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to continue on that path. So, and then I stayed at Michigan for my residency, and we did not have a great culture there. We had some pretty mean chief residents who weren't nice to us, and they weren't nice to the medicine residents and everything else. And so that culture kind of percolated through the program. So when you got consults, you mostly gave people a hard time for being stupid and idiots and things like that. And so my second year of residency, I think I was doing my third month of emergency consults, and Jerry Zelenak, who was a professor in vascular surgery there and just an amazing mentor and friend, pulled me into his office, and he said, "Mary, you're a great resident, you're really smart, you work really hard, but you are not going to be successful if you keep this up, if you keep this attitude up." And he said, "The most important things to be successful are the 3 A's, and they're availability, affability, and ability, in that order." And I really took that to heart. I really, this is somebody who I really admired and adored, and the fact that he took me in his office and sat me down and chewed me out in the nicest possible way. I knew that he really cared about me being better. And when you heard Justin Dimmick talk last month about surgeons or people who are willing to, accept criticism as feedback and to change, are the people who are going to be better and to be successful. And the people who accept criticism as criticism and not that somebody's trying to help them improve will probably never get better. So the first thing I can say, the key to being success is to remember these. I think they apply to everything. So the 3 A's, we don't always do them, but that's the order of importance. So then I continued on in my residency. I did 2 years of colorectal cancer research with another gastroenterologist, Rick Bolin, who's a fantastic mentor and friend. And I couldn't get funding from the surgery to work outside of surgery, so I got on the School of Public Health grant in cancer control, and one of the requirements was that I got my MPH. So that was totally serendipitous that I got a master's in public health at that time. And then Mike and I had some great successes in the lab then, and Mike Mulholland thought I was the best thing since sliced bread. He thought, somebody should just hire me straight out of the lab. And I was an administrative chief resident. And during that time, I think, as we talk about this work-life balance, I met Evan and we got married, and we overlapped in the lab for a year, so that was a great year for those of you who go out to do research. It's a great time to be able to really get reconnected with your life. We had 2 dogs, and during my chief year, I got pregnant with Sarah, my first child, and then my mom got diagnosed with stage 4 gastric cancer. So, and Evan was still a resident. He still had 2 years left. And so I had to wait for him to finish his residency. So I worked as a staff surgeon at the Ann Arbor VA. Mike Mulholland did give me that job. And I worked in a lab, and I was doing basic science research. But at the same time, I had a baby. My husband was a resident. My mom got a malignant obstruction, and I really had no academic productivity. And so at the end of my first year on faculty, and actually Mike cared for my mom. He was her surgeon. He sat me down, he says, "Mary, I'm shocked. You haven't done anything, you don't have any papers, you're a big failure." Basically, he didn't say failure, but he might as well. And so Evan was finishing his residency. He decided he wanted to apply for craniofacial fellowships. So for those of you in dual professional careers, you'll start understanding the complexities of this. So you have to decide where you're going to compromise. So there was geography. We were interested in where to go. He wanted to do a craniofacial fellowship. There weren't that many. And then there weren't that many that also had a fellowship that I could do for a year. And so depending upon where it was, I would either do a minimally invasive surgical fellowship or a colorectal surgical fellowship. I knew I wanted to do GI. And those were the one-year options that would match, his one-year option. And so then we had to make, or we could separate it. We could go separate ways, but we already had a child. And so you have to make all these decisions about, your fellowship, what your options are, your spouse's fellowships, what his options are, and then the duration of the fellowships. And it turns out there were 3 options. And so, and I took this slide from Evan. So basically, he originally applied to skull-base surgery. So he interviewed at the 3 spots and that were open, one including Minnesota, Oregon, and Michigan. He missed a plane for one interview. And another one, he told me he really didn't like cosmetic surgery, which is a big part of their their skull-base surgery fellowship, and he didn't match. So as we talked about, this is what we think success looks like, and this is what it really looks like. So he's a chief resident. I'm in my 2nd year of faculty, failing, as I've been told. And we don't know what we're going to do next after he finishes. And so we kind of, when he interviewed at Oregon, he talked to the guy who did the free flaps. And he said, well, if this doesn't work out for you, we're thinking of starting a fellowship. Maybe come talk to me, and you could come here and do a fellowship. And so he didn't match, and we said, well, what can we do? And Oregon had 2 MIS fellowships, and so we said, well, let's see if that path works. See if you can get this fellowship with Mark Wax and do free flaps, and I'll apply to these 2 MIS fellowships. And so we did. So we ended up for fellowships at OHSU, and so because of it was OHSU, they had an MIS fellowship and not a colorectal fellowship, and that's how I chose my specialty. But I wasn't particularly thrilled about it. I wasn't really the fellowship I wanted, so I thought, well, what else do you do in that year but just have another kid? And so I showed up at my fellowship about 6 months pregnant. It made me very popular, and they were good fellowships, but I don't think they weren't like the best fellowships out there at that time. The institution is really different from Michigan. It was really not a lot of emphasis on academic productivity, but it was a great opportunity to see another model, having been in Ann Arbor for 17 years before this. So it was good to get out of Michigan for me. And then we're finishing fellowships, and now we have this other dual professional career choice to make. And so we were looking at jobs, and we said, well, we really don't want to go to New York or LA because we got these 2 little kids and these 2 dogs, and we don't want to deal with traffic. And we don't want to go to the Deep South because we don't know anything about it, and it sounds scary. So the rest of it, that's a pretty wide range of acceptable geography, and a new definition of the Deep South. So when we were doing this job hunt, so I was not like in the best frame of mind, I would say, when I was looking for this job, and I knew I wanted to do be an academic surgeon. But I didn't want to do basic science research anymore. I tried that. I didn't think I was going to be able to do it and be successful at it and have a family. And at that time, if you were doing an MIS surgical fellowship, everybody wanted to be a bariatric surgeon. But I didn't want to do bariatric surgery either. And I didn't really know what my academic focus was going to be. I knew I wanted to be a GI surgeon. And so when I look at all that, I'm like, how did I ever get a job? What did I say in my interviews? But I did get a job, and it was here. In 2001, we took our jobs, and it's always a little awkward talking about these things in front of the people who hired you. But this is, and for the people on this side of the room, this will resonate with you. So I come here, and I meet with Dr. Bland, and he was late because he was in the OR, and he asked me about my interest in bariatrics, which I was very honest, and I said, none. And he kind of mumbled under his breath, like, oh, maybe you, Biggs, will be interested. So I assumed that was somebody else they were potentially interviewing for the job, and thought this 5-minute interview didn't go very well, and I didn't want to go to the Deep South anyway, so. And then Selwyn, as you know, is the chief of GI surgery, and he was really interested in having an MS program as part of his program. And I think he saw the promise in outcomes research, and I think he saw a path for an academic physician outside of basic science research. So that's how we came here in 2001, and it's probably not the story you had conjured up or imagined of how we ended up here, but and I think we came here with a lot of trepidation. And so how do you be successful? So one of the things that I think is really important when people are advising you, especially if you're going into academics and you go to the AAS, career development course, they all tell you how to be so protective of your time and to say no and to really, really be very calculating about what you agree to do. But I think that probably isn't the right way to go, and I think you need to say yes. And you need to say yes to a lot of things because you don't know what's going to hit. And so I call this a Blackberry Farm motto. So if anybody's been to Blackberry Farm, it's this fantastic place up in the Smokies, and they say they're virtually incapable of saying no. So you don't want to be quite there, but you do want to say yes, because academics is a team sport. None of us get where we are by ourselves. We're relying on a lot of other people to get there. And everybody is busy. And there's nothing that's more frustrating when you ask somebody to do something and they tell you how busy they are and they can't do it. And you know they have the bandwidth to do it. But we're all busy. So you have to be careful about saying no in those circumstances because you may not get asked again. So, and then I think you really need to be generous with your time, but you do need to be selective. So you can't say yes to everything, but you do need to say yes to a lot of things. So my success here, so how did I do it? So I reinvented myself as a health services researcher, and I had two amazing mentors in my time here. So one was Katerina Kifa, who probably most people don't know, but she was the division director of preventive medicine. And she was a nationally recognized health services researcher, and she just kind of took me under her wings and helped mentor me, helped me identify a project. And the first grant we submitted extramurally was funded on the first submission, like unheard of. And so we just got incredibly fortunate. It was the right time to go into the field. And I had a lot of failures leading up to this. I had submitted society grants and the American Surgical and the college and got this no, thank you. So I'm not saying that everything I put in got accepted, but that was really the first thing that really turned things for me in terms of my success. And then Lee Newmeyer, who is a good friend and colleague and mentor to me as a general surgeon she's now the chair at Arizona, but she was at the University of Utah, and she's the one who helped make it happen because I needed to get access to data, and they were mostly saying no, and she said yes, and she helped me, and she's been my friend and colleague since then. So that's one of those things, like it's really easy, you send somebody an email, you don't know who they are, you get these emails, and she didn't know who I was. I just sent her this email saying I need some help getting these data, and she helped. And it's led to this kind of lifelong, friendship. So saying yes is important. And then on top of that, I've made some amazing hires. Some of them are in this room in terms of my support staff for my research. And then I had a long line of talented surgical residents who've worked for me very hard and have really made my success possible. And so, and I'm grateful to all of them. So, and then clinically, anything but bariatric surgery. It takes a lot of work to build a practice here, especially in elective foregut surgery. And so you have to do a lot of things you don't want to do to be able to do the things you do want to do. So you can't come in and say, I'm only, doing, right toe surgery. You have to be willing to do a lot of things for referrals, and then eventually they'll figure out what you like and start sending you some good stuff too. I think you always have to challenge yourself to be better and your team to be better. And you have to do what's best for your patient. And remember those 3 A's. And then I think what's really important, especially as an MIS surgeon, is to really watch relationships with industry, because I just see people just immediately get discounted, right? So with the, especially like in the hernia era, people who had strong relationships with different mesh companies and things like that, anything they said, you just immediately kind of discounted, that it wasn't necessarily true. And so, anyway, so I think those are things that, in my opinion, you need to be very careful about as you're making decisions. So lesson number 2, the car goes where the eye goes. So you can't be what you can't see. You need role models, you need mentors, and people to show you the path of how to get there when you can't see it. And you need to focus on your own goals. You don't get caught up on what others are doing or what they have. So, and I think we all are jealous of that, or sensitive to that. So, and Dr. Gewurz, when he was here, and I don't know who heard his talk, but he talked about this colleague, his co-resident, and they were like always competing, and he's always worried about what this guy was doing. Was he doing something better or not? Rather than, this was actually a great friend and colleague of his, but he worried more about whether he was getting ahead of quicker than in his career than Dr. Gewurz was. And so I think it's always important to not kind of look around and figure out what other people are doing, but just to try and stay true to yourself and what you're trying to accomplish. And to put your principles before your principal PAL money. So make sure you're always doing the right thing. So, so all those tickets to success are important. So funding, papers, awards, committees, referrals, education. We get all these different ways that people measure us as being successful. But it's important to also remember that there are tickets to failure. And when Bing Rickers came here as the Aldretti lecturer several years ago, he gave this great talk on surgical leadership. And I always like to reiterate these points as well, in addition to the 3 A's, because I think they're critical. And so what he says the tickets to failure are, if you're a faculty or a resident or a student, if you have this inflated self-worth of I, like I'm too important to do that, I can't do that, and that you have problems, and you are complaining a fair amount, knocking on the door, and especially if you have problems without solutions. If you're coming in and saying this is a big problem, and you don't really have an idea of how to solve it. Those are things that really will kind of wear down your division director, your chair, your dean, whoever. And then I've added to this that that if you find yourself surrounded by a lot of problems, it's time to get a mirror. So. And then the bottom line is why are these important? Because every time you go with a complaint or a problem, you're using a ticket. And you never know how many tickets you have until you punch the last one. And so I can really hear this kind of crunching of a ticket puncher when I go to Dr. Bland. I say, oh, this is a big problem. We got to fix this. I hear, crunch. So you have to be careful and spend those tickets really, really wisely. And it turns out that this actually, although Dr. Rickers, when he came here, gave this talk, that this was actually a talk that he heard given by Jerry Shuck at one of the surgical biology clubs. Is one of these after-dinner talks. And he says it's the only one he really remembers. And if anybody's, everybody's been to these dinners and then they have some speaker after dinner and you just are tuning out because you're tired. And so he talks about how when Dr. Shuck gave this talk in the, I think it was in the 80s, that he still remembered it when he came here in the mid-2000s to give the lecture. And when he came here and gave this talk, I remembered it. So we've had many lecturers, many Aldretti lecturers, and so it's just, I think whenever you get good advice like this and it really resonates, it's good to keep giving it to other people and recirculating it. So lesson number 3, and I think this is really the most important one for us as surgeons, is that true champions outperform in the ring. So things aren't going to always work out. They're not always going to work out in the OR. They're not always going to work out in your research project. They're not always going to work out in your personal life the way you intended. So I think this is really an opportunity to distinguish yourself. And so how you perform in these circumstances is what's going to separate you from everybody else. And this is really what the art of success is. And it's knowing what battles to fight and when, and finding creative solutions for problems. So be the problem solver, and finding opportunities and step back. And there's been a fair amount of research about this. So what is this really, all this describing? This is really describing resiliency. And so what is resilience? Resilience is that ineffable quality that allows some people to be knocked down by life and come back stronger than ever. And we see it all the time. We see it all the time. And the factors that are associated with resilience are positive attitude, optimism, the ability to regulate your emotions, and ability to see failure as a form of helpful feedback. And so even after misfortune, resilient people are able to change course and soldier on. So optimism is one of these things that I think doesn't really come always naturally to us as physicians, because we see a lot of tragedy out there. We get pretty skeptical about things because there's often nothing we can really do for people to change the course of their horrible disease. And sometimes we actually contribute to it, right? Sometimes we cause some of their bad outcomes, and sometimes we may do something that directly leads to a patient dying. We're also, especially this side of the room, is overworked, overregulated, and underpaid. But we just feel like we're getting this kind of increasing lack of control over our lives. And so you can really kind of get caught in this negative cycle of that this is no longer a good career, a good life. And so I think it's important to really view these things differently so that we see people who are really suffering, and that we have the opportunity sometimes to really relieve that suffering. And we may not cure them, we may not make them better, but we can be compassionate and we can try to help them along that path. And we can learn more from our mistakes than our successes. And I think that's, Lauren, are you here, Tanner, who's presented more M&Ms than anybody else? She's probably our smartest chief resident, right? So I think that's why M&M is so important, because we learn more from our mistakes, and that's why we do it. And then something can be learned from almost any interaction with any resident, any surgeon, any colleague, any patient. So this whole positive attitude thing. So I'm going to just digress here a little bit. So Sean Aker is a psychologist, and he was at Harvard, and now he's out kind of in a think tank. and he researches happiness, and he researched happiness of Harvard students, which makes you think it's kind of silly. Why shouldn't they be ecstatic? They're at Harvard. And he gave this great TED Talk that I just want to give you a little snippet of, because I think it kind of sets the tone for things that we really need to be aware of. So he talks fast, faster than me, but I think this is going to work.
If I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. That undergirds most of our parenting styles, our managing styles, the way that we motivate our behavior. And the problem is it's scientifically broken and backwards for 2 reasons. First, every time your brain has a success, you just change the goalpost of what success looked like. You got good grades, now you have to get better grades. You got into a good school, now you have to get a better school. You got a good job, now you have to get a better job. You hit your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. And if happiness is on the opposite side of success, your brain never gets there. What we've done is we've pushed happiness over the cognitive horizon as a society. And that's because we think we have to be successful, then we'll be happier. But the real problem is our brains work in the opposite order. If you can raise somebody's level of positivity in the present, then their brain experiences what we now call a happiness advantage, which is your brain at positive performs significantly better than it does at negative, neutral, or stressed. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, your energy levels rise. In fact, what we found is that every single business outcome improves. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stressed. You're 37% better at sales. Doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when positive instead of negative, neutral, or stressed.
All right. So there's a TED Talk, so you can Google it and go watch it if you haven't seen it. But I think it's the whole talk is fantastic. So, but the point that he's making, and I think that what we are really have all been geared toward, right, is that accomplishment. You're just marching through. You do your 4 years of undergrad, and then you do well, and you get into medical school, and that we are always putting kind of that happiness, that delayed gratification. We are the kings and queens of delayed gratification in surgery. We take the longest, hardest training programs, and we think at the end we're finally going to find happiness. And so, but what he's saying is that life doesn't work that way, and your brain doesn't work that way. That if you're happy and you're happy in the moment, then you will be successful. So another person who's written about this that I think it's some interesting concepts for us to keep in mind is something called status anxiety. And it's not like status epilepticus. It's like looking at people around you, and I say, well, geez, look at Dr. Kirby. He's so well funded, and he does this and he does that, and I can never be him. And I'm always kind of using these yardsticks and measuring myself against other people. And we think that life is like this meritocracy, right? That we all have equal opportunities to achieve exactly the same things, and that's really us that are keeping ourselves from doing this. That we think that we live in a meritocracy, but we don't. I mean, it's really an unrealized promise in our society still. And then so that gets into our self-esteem, and so we say, well, your self-esteem is totally based on what successes you have and how you value or measure your own successes. Other people look outside and probably think you are all incredibly wildly successful, versus how successful are your pretensions, how successful you think you should be. And so a graph here shows you that if you have, on the y-axis here, this level of happiness, and then on the x-axis is supposed to be time, and you put this accomplished, I'm going to graduate from general surgery residency, and you have this view of like when I hit that accomplishment, I'm going to reach this new steady state of happiness. And that what really happens is that you have that acquisition, you reach that steady state of, or that new level of happiness, but then it degrades pretty quickly. And I think actually where he has that dotted line is wrong. I actually think you're going to finish. And so you kind of, by the time you finish, you're already like, oh yeah, I was going to do that anyway. And you don't even realize the happiness that you thought you were going to achieve from that accomplishment. So it's really important to keep that thought in mind of not putting happiness on the other side of success, because it is a moving target. So you have to train yourself to be happy. And so if you watch the rest of his talk, he talks about this. And he says basically you should say 3 things that you're grateful every day. So when your patient frustrates you, you should be grateful that you are not in their position, right? That you are not the person who is ill. You are the person who is well, and you should have compassion. One of the things that I use a lot is I say I have to, and nobody really is making me do most of the things I'm saying I have to do. I'm making myself do them. So I try to change that as I'm going to, or I'm looking forward to. And I try to get rid of that I have to out of my language, because I think it's so negative. And it makes me feel negative about something that I chose to do. Your fellow residents, students, and nurses, and anesthesiologists, are really mostly not trying to make your life miserable, and so you really have to give them respect first. If somebody's asking you for help, they usually really need it. And try not to get frustrated by them. You have to set reasonable expectations of what you can accomplish. Don't forget those 3 A's and those 3 things to be grateful for. And I think if you really kind of keep that all, in the forefront of your mind, it's a good tool to help kind of keep yourself realistic about your expectations. So one of the things that I do, that I get asked all the time as a surgeon and a mom and the wife of a surgeon is, how do you do it? And so my main goal in life is to keep them guessing, because they must think I'm doing something well, and I don't want to tell them what I'm not doing well. And so I think of this, we recently went to Easter Island, and nobody really knows how they got these statues up on that platform. So I kind of think of that in the back of my mind. It's like, well, we'll never really know. But I think the most important thing is if you say you're going to do it, and do it before the deadline. Nobody likes to harass you. If you committed to do something and they gave you a deadline to, they don't like to harass you to turn it in. Be nice about it and be gracious. Thank somebody for the opportunity when they ask you to do something. And then this whole concept of having it all, I want to talk about, because I think it really is something that plagues women and more than men. And in fact, they write about it. And there was a Atlantic Monthly essay probably about 4 years ago written by this woman, Anne-Marie Slaughter, and she's a dean at Princeton. And she wrote this article about why women still can't have it all. And the article was, she's a dean at Princeton, and she gets her dream job in the Obama administration to go and work at the State Department under Hillary Clinton. And her husband also has a high-level position at Princeton, and they have 2 teenage children. And they decide that she's going to go to DC, he's going to stay at Princeton, the kids are going to stay there. She's doing this kind of commute back and forth, working 100 hours a week, and she knew that was the demands of the State Department job. And teenage children, things didn't work out so well. She ended up leaving the job and going back to her dean job at Princeton and wrote this essay about why women still can't have it all. So I think that's just so destructive. I don't think that guys really talk about having it all in that same way. And I think it's really, that discourse is really destructive to women, because it makes our inherent choices the focus of our success, or lack thereof. And in general, I think it leads to women being critical women, which is not helpful for us either. So, and nobody has it all, right? I don't know anybody who has it all the time, but at the same time, we really do have it all. Everybody sitting in this room is incredibly fortunate to be sitting here. So I hate that word, that whole concept of having it all. And when you look, in many ways, this woman, she had it all. So don't talk about having it all or not having it all. Let's just abolish that. But I think there are still challenges for women in surgery. The number of female full professors in surgery is not high. It's, I think it's slightly reached, it's over 100 now, all-time women professors in surgery. The women chairs in surgery, there are 12 in the country now, the 170 chair jobs or so, depending upon how you count them. And office holders in roles, important organizations, is still low. Women represent 50% of medical students, and they're less than 30% of residency applicants. And I think that's important because we need role models and we need leaders so that 50% of the medical students can look and see a path towards success. So like I told you, I had to find people to show me how to be successful and mentors and people that I could see a path. And so it's really important to have diversity in leadership. And increasingly, that's going to be a challenge for all of us, our dual professional couples. So I showed you some of the challenges for us in terms of geography and choices and fellowships and careers and what we do. And that as we have more and more physicians marry other physicians, it presents unique challenges. And the programs that solve those challenges are going to be the programs that are going to have access to the best talent and get the best people. But it's a challenge that we have to be cognizant of. So how you really do it, I think it's all about your pit crew. And so it's about your family, your friends, your colleagues, your OR team, your research team, your office team, all the people who are there keeping you going, getting things done when you're not able to do them, and keeping you going in the right direction. And so these are just some pictures of my pit crew. So these are my kids going back to, where I'm back from a Michigan game, my dogs, and everybody knows Evan. So, and I love this little thing here. So my children, I think everybody says, I think, why do I save for their college education? I should just save for their therapy. So please grant me the serenity to accept these parents I cannot change. I think they must feel that way some days. But they're great kids, and they've been incredibly supportive of both Evan and I, and they really have been fun. So I think it's important to work hard, but it's also important to play hard. So enjoy time outside the hospital, and we certainly love to do that. And we do that by traveling. And one of the things that I will miss the most probably about Alabama is our lake house. So here's Walker with his buddies, and just that opportunity to have that independence and that freedom. Here is a good Alabama picture of Sarah. And of course, going to Michigan football games. But it's also important to have some downtime. And sometimes I think you just have to give in to complete exhaustion. But most importantly, be part of a great team and really value and respect and enjoy your colleagues. And that certainly has been the most meaningful thing for me being here over the last 14 years. Is the privilege and the opportunity to work closely with the GI surgery team, with our OR team, with my research team. So start your engines for the Chiefs who are graduating. I'm really proud of you. You have a great start. You got to pace yourself, and don't give up, even if you feel behind. Remember, the car goes where the eye goes, so look down that road, and don't get distracted. Don't be worried about what kind of nice car, practice house somebody else is buying. Just, keep focused on what you want to accomplish, and then take the advantage of differentiating yourself in failure. And that really requires being flexible, being resilient, and embrace challenges with solutions, and avoid losing battles. So I want to thank you for listening to my musings. One of my favorite quotes from Oscar Wilde is, "I'm not young enough to know everything." There's a lot of people in this room that can give you a lot more sage advice than I can. And then finally, remember to spend your tickets wisely. This probably wasn't a good investment of my money. And I'm looking forward to taking all that I've learned from everybody here to my new job at Stanford. So thank you very much for the honor and privilege of talking today, and thank you, Dr. Bland, for being such a great chair and mentor and friend to me.
Thank you, Mary. Superb talk, Mary. Sage advice. Truly, you've heard it from someone who's done this. I tell you, Mary did I've admired her accomplished goals of how she has managed her time. She takes the most exotic vacations, she and Evan and the kids. She has raised two incredible kids, Walker and Sarah, balanced in every sphere. I'll say that because I know them at a very high level, but I'll tell you, every time I meet them, they're just perfect gentlemen men and just brilliant kids. They're going to have a fabulous future, and I do hope there are surgeons like
I hope so
that.
too.
I do hope that. But Mary, impart to us just how you manage your time. Because that, you think about what she's going to do here. She's going to be a chair. She's a mother. She's a very busy person in her research efforts and mentoring. And she's the new director of the American Board of Surgery. You have got serious commitments. Managing your time is one of the things we never talk about that in detail. It is most probably as important as any part of this that you talked about. Because if you don't manage your time, you're not going to be home with your family, you're not going to be you're not going to be happy. It's going to impact you downstream, right, Mary?
That's right.
How do you manage that? Because you do a better job than anybody I know.
Well, thank you for saying that. I don't know that I do, but it's funny because I was just in Dr. Bland's office before here, and that's the first thing I said, "Dr. Bland, I need some advice and help on how to manage my time." And I said, "What do I do? What are the most important things?" So it's clearly, I think, is something that you have to always be thinking about and cognizant. And so I think a little bit goes back to some of those lessons. So the car goes where the eye goes, right? So make good choices about what you're doing. Be focused on where you're going and what you're doing. And don't spend a lot of time and negative energy worrying about what somebody else is doing, things that you can't control. So if you can't control it, that sucks up so much emotional and mental energy, and we can just sit there and obsess about it. So if you can just learn to kind of let things go. And sometimes it's easier if it's a colleague or it's a nemesis. Those things are a little easier to let go than if it's a patient, right? That you're really worried and concerned about. Sometimes they just really drain us, and we you need to find ways to recharge, because there's no way to not, you know, in order to be a good person, you have to be compassionate, and you have to care about your patients and things that you do. So those things really wear at us, and so make sure that you make some time for yourself to recharge, so that you can keep soldiering on and keep that optimistic attitude so you can be more productive. Yeah.
Questions? Kind of some questions. Okay. Since we had two.
Dr. Vickers is in the back.
Where is he? Oh, yes. Thank you. Mary, I missed the 3 A's.
Yes. So the 3 A's are being available, being affable, and being able, in that order.
Good say advice.
Yep.
We have 2 chief residents last night, Brittany and Lauren, I guess, where you asked Mary to be your introducer last night. I'm going to give you the opportunity as chief residents to ask the first question from the residents. How about it, Lauren?
If you think back to where you are at this point in your career,
Mm-hmm.
what do you think is the most advice that you would give us? I mean, where you are now seems such a far cry from where I am now. So I would just love to know what you know you think is the most important thing to focus on at this point.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to focus on being true to yourself, and because you're not always going to be successful, you're going to have failures, and just to try and to take care of yourself, and so that you can kind of bounce back and be stronger and learn, you know, be in a place where you can learn from those and try not to repeat them. And I think you guys are all in amazing places. I mean, I look at, you know, where I was at the end of my residency and things like that, I mean, I think you guys are in an amazing place and off to a strong start. But it's not always going to be that way, right? It's not a straight line. So that's what I would say, is just always make time for yourself to take care of yourself.
Well, I'm really curious to know how long your team is, but prepare myself to. What time do you get up in the morning?
Depends on the morning. So that's one of the things I do to take care of myself. I have
That's a run.
I have a group of girlfriends, and we meet at 5:15 in the morning, and we go for a run or we go to the gym. Not like 3 mornings a week when we're good, but not always. But they're not in medicine. They're lawyers. One's an executive director of a nonprofit, but we all have kids, and we all have husbands who work, and we just, you know, talk about life and challenges and share stories. But mostly just it's a time for me. Yeah.
We want to
Great.
thank you for coming
Thank
back
you.
to visit us again. I know it's your last technical visit as well, you're not a faculty member, I guess, anymore, but you have done a spectacular job. Everybody in here, the residents, faculty, wish you the very best in your new position. Please come back and visit again soon.
Well,
Okay?
thank you. I look forward to it. Thank you very much.